Strange gift. You said if the deliverer were a myth, bring him in a bottle.
Think Egypt was all gold, gods, and glory? Not even close. Behind those temples and pyramids was a justice system built on fear, blood, and divine approval. The same civilization that invented perfume also perfected pain. Every crime, no matter how small, was treated like a cosmic disaster. You didn't just break the law, you offended the universe itself. And that's how the Egyptians justified some of the most creative tortures ever recorded. Their entire worldview revolved around one word: Ma'at, order, balance, harmony. Sounds poetic until you realize keeping that balance often meant breaking bones. When you messed with Ma'at, you weren't just in trouble with the guards, you were in trouble with the gods. And that gave priests and pharaohs a free pass to do pretty much anything. Imagine standing in a temple courtyard, accused of stealing a loaf of bread. The priests don't need proof. Your fear is proof enough. You're tied down, and the first lash hits, not from a whip, but from reeds soaked in salt water. That's the Egyptian twist. Salt made every cut sting for days. The message was clear: pain keeps order. The crowd watched, nodded, and went back to their errands like it was just another Tuesday. Public punishment wasn't shameful, it was sacred theater. Priests chanted, the sun blazed, someone screamed, and everyone else thanked the gods for justice. Cruelty was divine maintenance. And they didn't stop at beatings. Egypt had a punishment that turned the desert itself into an executioner. It started simple: a shovel, a patch of sand, and your own grave. Prisoners were forced to dig narrow pits, then stand inside while guards filled the hole up to their necks. The midday sun did the rest. Your lips cracked, your skin blistered, and by the time the sun went down, Ma'at was restored, and you were gone. Sometimes they left the head sticking out for days as a warning, an early version of "don't try this at home." Archaeologists have found pits with claw marks inside the walls, proof that victims fought to get out as the sand squeezed tighter. Egypt didn't need gallows. They had the Sahara. But the desert wasn't the only weapon. For women, punishment was branding, literally. Heated bronze rods pressed against the cheek, leaving the mark of a serpent or a god for crimes like speaking out or being accused of adultery. No proof needed. The husband's word was enough. The brand burned deep, not just in skin, but in society. Once marked, you couldn't enter temples or markets. Kids threw stones, neighbors whispered, and even the priests who branded you would later redeem you, usually by forcing you into temple prostitution. Justice with a side of hypocrisy. For men, things weren't prettier. Suspension torture was common. Wrists tied behind your back, hoisted up till only your toes touched the ground. Within minutes, shoulders popped out. Within hours, nerves snapped. But you weren't supposed to die. You were supposed to hurt, visibly, permanently. The kind of pain that preached obedience better than any sermon. Work camp logs actually list beatings right next to tool shipments. 50 lashes, 20 chisels. 3 workers missing pain was just another supply on the list. And then there were the disappearances. Not all punishments were public. Some were silent, the kind that made everyone afraid to ask questions. Beneath temples and worker villages were small, airless rooms where the unlucky vanished. No screaming crowds, no priests chanting hymns of justice. Just the sound of footsteps fading down a corridor, and then nothing. People went in and never came out. Scribes documented it like it was part of the daily routine. Sent 3 to silence today. The next line, bricks delivered. It was bureaucracy at its most chilling. Lives erased between inventory notes. Archaeologists have uncovered skeletons sealed into temple walls, tools still clutched in hand, proof that some workers were literally entombed in the monuments they built. Others were buried under floors or walled up in unfinished chambers, their names scraped from records so they'd be forgotten twice, in life and in death. That's how Egypt erased both crime and criminal. No trial, no burial, no afterlife. Just deletion from existence. In a world where memory meant immortality, being forgotten was the ultimate punishment. To be wiped from the story wasn't just death, it was spiritual extinction. And every silent disappearance kept the rest of Egypt obedient, terrified that one mistake could make them vanish too. The Egyptians even turned torture into ritual art. And their strangest creation, something that sounds innocent, sweet even, until you realize it was pure nightmare fuel: the honey punishment. Victims were stripped naked, smeared head to toe in thick honey mixed with date syrup, and tied to stakes near swamps or garbage pits. At first, it looked ridiculous, until the insects arrived. Flies, ants, and mosquitoes swarmed in clouds so thick you could barely see skin anymore. Every inch of the body became a buzzing battlefield. Some people survived for hours, twitching and gasping. Others stayed alive for days, delirious and covered in crawling, stinging misery. Priests, of course, gave it divine meaning. They blessed the honey as an offering to the flies of Amun, turning an act of sadism into a religious ritual. That's Egypt for you, where theology met entomology and came up with torture. And the worst part? This wasn't rare, it was standard punishment. Worker logs read like grocery lists, tools repaired, rations counted, boy honeyed for stealing bread. A 12-year-old, just one more entry on a page. To them, suffering wasn't cruelty, it was order. Egypt truly believed pain kept the world from falling apart, and they recorded every sting to prove it. So why didn't anyone rebel? Because the system didn't just punish bodies, it controlled minds. Mut taught people that suffering wasn't random, it was deserved. It kept the sun rising and the Nile flooding. If someone was beaten, that meant balance was restored. It's terrifyingly effective. When pain feels righteous, you stop calling it pain. That belief gave Egypt centuries of stability and centuries of silence. But eventually, the silence cracked. Over time, Egypt's rulers realized they had a problem: too much truth on record. Stone carvings showed prisoners whipped and mutilated. Papyrus scrolls listed punishments in chilling detail, and for a civilization obsessed with perfection, that kind of honesty wasn't good PR. So the great cover-up began. Whips became instruments of order. Beatings were divine corrections. And branding irons, officially renamed holy seals. Pain didn't disappear, it just got a rebrand. The same tortures continued behind temple walls, but the language softened. In official records, scribes swapped 50 lashes for balance restored. Pharaohs wanted to look enlightened, not brutal. The truth got buried under poetry and propaganda. If you ever wonder why Egyptian art always looks so serene, flawless gods, smiling workers, perfect symmetry, that was the point. No one wanted history to remember the blood, just the beauty. Behind those graceful hieroglyphs were the screams of people who didn't make it into the story. The evidence is still there, though, if you know where to look. Archaeologists have dug up trash pits filled with scraps of papyri that never made it into the official archives, the uncensored stuff. Real records from work camps talk about beatings until silence, or workers branded for speaking falsehoods against a foreman. There's even a note about someone being buried for disobedience. Short, simple, horrifying. Human bones tell the same story. Broken spines, fused joints, deep scars that never healed. Some mummies even show permanent nerve damage from suspension torture. Proof that pain wasn't symbolic. It was systematic. And yet modern history still clings to the polished version. The one where pyramid workers sing while stacking stone. The one where Egypt was a land of wisdom and order, not whips and salt. But let's be real. You don't build empires out of kindness. You build them out of control. And ancient Egypt controlled everything: your work, your faith, even your body after death. If you were accused, your punishment wasn't just about what you did. It was about reminding everyone else to stay in line. You became an example, a living warning carved into society's memory. Picture standing in the marketplace, watching someone dragged forward, priests chanting as guards deliver punishment. The crowd doesn't flinch, they nod. Because that's what order looks like. And that's what made it so terrifying. Pain disguised as peace. The irony: Egyptians believed the afterlife judged your soul by weighing your heart against a feather. Light heart, eternal peace. Heavy heart, monster food. But think about it. How light could anyone's heart really be after living in a world where even complaining about your rations could get you whipped in public? Still, the people accepted it, because when the gods demand pain, you start to see it as sacred. The guards weren't cruel, they were divine accountants balancing the books of the universe. It's twisted but genius, a system where torture felt moral and obedience felt holy. Let's rewind to those legendary construction sites for a second. You've got thousands of workers hauling limestone under a sun hot enough to melt sandals. Overseers pacing with copper rods sharpened at one end, tools that archaeologists once mistook for measuring sticks until they noticed the dried blood. Workers who slowed down got encouragement taps, and if that didn't work, they got the full treatment. And you'd better believe it was recorded. Egypt loved paperwork more than any civilization in history. Every blow, every injury, every missing worker was logged by scribes with terrifying precision. The same hands that wrote hymns to the gods also documented how many men were beaten that morning. So when people say the pyramids were built by hand, they're technically right, but they forget the hands were bleeding. The most haunting part of all this is how deeply the system believed its own myth. Pain wasn't hidden in the shadows, it was carved into the stone, painted on temple walls, celebrated as divine order. And yet centuries later, the same civilization rewrote its past to look noble and wise, as if perfection could wash away cruelty. But that's the thing about truth. No matter how many layers of gold you wrap around it, the bones underneath still whisper. Every reed soaked in salt water, every burned cheek, every nameless worker sealed inside a wall. They're all still there, under the sand, under the stories, under the illusion of peace. Next time you see a pyramid glinting in the sunlight, remember, that shine was bought with pain. Those perfect carvings of gods and pharaohs, they were chiseled by hands that trembled from beatings. That ceremonial staff in a museum. It might have been a torture stick polished for tourists. Egypt's greatest achievement wasn't just architecture, it was image control. They didn't just build monuments, they built myths. Myths where suffering became sacred and silence became survival. And that's the hidden truth of ancient Egypt, a civilization that preached harmony while practicing horror. They believed pain purified the soul, that every scream strengthened the universe. And for thousands of years, that belief worked. Until one day, the stones started talking again, through the papyri, the skeletons, and the scars they tried to erase. So next time you walk through a museum or see a glossy documentary showing smiling workers and golden gods, ask yourself, what did it really cost to build that piece? Whose blood made the sand so red? And how many voices had to vanish for history to sound so quiet? If that made you see Egypt differently, stick around. We've got more ancient myths to unmask soon. And trust me, they only get darker from here.